It has been a really long time since I posted any JJK content, and in case you guys are wondering, that's because I took a short break from the game, purely because just, well, one, lack of content in the game. Second of all, a lot of the stages nowadays is literally just dependent on whether or not you have certain character. There's no trick or strategy to it anymore. So personally, the game is not that enjoyable to me anymore, and that's kind of why I took a short break. Having said that, now it's anniversary time, and for all of the free-to-play players out there, this is the time for us to go crazy on the summons, right? We all kind of know in this game, pity is ridiculously stupid. Therefore, vast majority of the time is you'll be skipping over the standard banner character for half a year, and then as soon as it's anniversary, you're going to splash out. And now because it's anniversary, I know people will be splashing out, and we have so many limited characters to choose from. That's kind of why I decided to make today's video talking about which one do you actually want to put on top of your priority in terms of which limited character you want to get this time around. Now, obviously, we're going to get 4 beach characters. You guys can already see here, we have the beach version of Gojo, Yuji, and also Nobara, and also Megumi. However, at the same time, on JP, they also had the rerun banner of Max Impact Yuji, Todo, Fuga Sukuna, and also Mahito as well. So actually, this time around, it's not just talking about choosing between the 4 new limited time character, but also if you have missed any of the previous 4 limited time characters, you actually have a choice between the 8 characters available. Okay, so that's kind of why in my recommendation, I'll be actually ranking across all 8 different characters. Now, just to talk about the rationale of how I came up with this priority tier list, I always evaluate a character based on whether or not there's a like-for-like replacement. Now, all of the limited characters are going to be really, really strong. However, at the same time, there's tend to be a free-to-play alternative for them as well if you have to go budget. So when I actually talk about which limited character do you want to go and invest in or summon for, I normally actually look at what's going to be the next free-to-play alternative, because at the end of the day, if you only have limited amount of resources, you have to make a choice to maximize your value by picking a category where it's going to be very hard for you to replace. Okay, so that's basically the way I'm going to do all of my tiers, and that's also going to be the narrative. You'll see it here as well. For example, at the top, I have red Mahito, and the reason is that it's going to be hard to replace. Okay, and then also at the end, you can see I have blue Yuji, and the reason is that you should be choosing Gojo instead. Okay, so now let's just go through the tier one by one. So at the top of the tier, I'm going to have Mahito, and the reason for this is that he's actually really, really difficult to replace from my recent experience. Now, on paper, he's just a damage dealt debuffer, and we do actually have a very strong damage dealt debuffer in the game already in the form of Domain Gojo. But the thing is, Domain Gojo can only be on the battle for a limited number of turns. And right now, it just seems like so many of the endgame stages, the enemies are just literally like a HP sponge, okay? They have a huge amount of HP, and it's just not going to be possible to clear the stages in that short amount of time while Domain Gojo is still available. And that's kind of why for those kind of longer battles, it's actually going to be really, really hard, in my opinion, to actually replace Red Mahito. Now, there's going to be a free-to-play alternative that you can potentially go for as well, which is Red Mai. But one thing that I found Red Mahito really also shines as well is the insane amount of break damage he's able to offer. I love the harder stages. It's not just about whether or not you can, have enough damage to kill off the enemy eventually, but also at the same time, because the battles are really, really long, you have to have the ability to sustain the battle as well. And what break damage actually allows you to do is the fact that if you're actually able to break the enemy, that buys you 3 extra turns essentially. Okay, so as a result, Red Mahito is not just there for the debuff, he can also do damage, but also at the same time, he also helps your survivability by breaking the enemy faster and more frequently. So, and overall, I just feel like he's a complete package, which no other character can really replace. And that's kind of why out of all of the 8 limited time characters available, I'm actually going to put him at the top of the list. Okay? Now, next here, we're going to have 3 characters. Now, the narrative I'm going to put here is that they are all dual support, because essentially all 3 of those characters are able to perform 2 functionality in them. Okay, now you could argue for every single one of them, if I only use them for one purpose, you can probably find another alternative to go as a budget replacement. However, because of that they are actually able to perform 2 roles, what that basically means is that if you do actually end up bringing them into the battle instead of the free-to-play alternative, they can offer just that tiny bit more in the battles themselves. And also, it also kind of allow you to, for example, if you're short of resources on potentially SP, potential unlock, etc. It also allows you to basically just invest your resources onto one character rather than on two different characters. So that's kind of why I feel like they are potentially replaceable if you only look at one side of their functionality. However, because they're able to offer both sides at once, that makes them the next tier down in terms of priority. Okay. So starting off, we have Beach Gojo. He's able to offer both curse and physical technique buff, but also damage dealt buff as well. So essentially, he's going to be an upgraded version of Yellow Shogun. Okay, so he's going to be there for that do functionality. Then we have Green Megumi, who is essentially able to offer both damage dealt debuff as well as the curse technique melee physical technique debuff as well. Once again, he's able to offer both roles. You may even potentially switch it up depending on the playstyle and your teammate, but because he's able to offer two, that makes him a bit more versatile to any of the other free-to-play alternative out there as well. And then next, we are going to have Green Todo. Now, the utility he's able to offer is, first of all, he's able to offer physical technique buff, which essentially, if you already have Green Shoko, then I would argue Green Shoko is going to be a better supporter than Todo here, because Green Shoko can also buff up the curse technique buff as well, whereas Todo is not able to do that. However, Todo is also just a very, very hard hitter. And in fact, out of all of the green physical attackers out there, you kind of need Todo to fulfill that green DPS role as well. So once again, he's able to offer two functionality in one character, regardless which route you go down with him. And that's kind of why he's also going to be incredibly versatile and very useful to have as well. Okay, but that's kind of why all three of the characters are going to be the next tier down in terms of priority. Then the next tier, we're going to have what I call upgrade your DPS. Now, once again, there are going to be free-to-play alternative for them because they're all DPS character, and there are actually going to be other alternative character you can use, which I have actually all listed out here as well, that you can use as the other alternative DPS. However, one thing you may be arguing is that unlike the support character where you can say literally, if I get this character, he is just able to offer a lot more than the free-to-play alternative, and therefore it's no-brainer. I'll be using the premium character rather than free-to-play alternative. For DPS, it's not necessarily the case because for the premium character, it's very likely you can only get one copy for him, maybe one dupe. However, for the free-to-play character, you can normally max awaken them by buying their dupes from the shop. And a lot of the time, I wouldn't actually say like a max dupe alternative free-to-play DPS is actually that much worse than a zero dupe premium limited character DPS, okay? And that's kind of why, unlike the support character where I do feel like there's actually a significant gap between the limited character and also the free-to-play alternative. For DPS, provided you're actually able to max dupe the free-to-play alternative, the gap is not actually as obvious or as big in my opinion. So that's kind of why they are all, in general, a lower tier down than the support characters, okay? So starting off with 0.2 second domain Gojo. So basically the free-to-play alternative for him is going to be Blue Miwa. Now I have to say, out of all of the DPS I have listed here, this one's probably the one which is hardest to find a good alternative because the blue physical DPS, there literally just isn't that many good choices. So if you really have to pick one DPS out of the four here, then blue 0.2 second domain Gojo is probably the one I would pick. And in fact, there is also going to be another physical DPS in this time around as well, which is going to be the new Beach Yuji. However, the reality is, even though 0.2 second domain Gojo can only be on the field for a limited number of turns, if your new Beach Yuji is only at 0 dupe, so doesn't have any of the awakening skills, etc., his damage output is just not going to be as high as the 0.2 second domain Gojo. And even though 0.2 second domain Gojo would eventually leave the field, afterwards, for the remainder of battle, you can just use another free-to-play alternative DPS instead. So that's kind of why overall, out of the two blue physical DPS, I would definitely suggest go after 0.2 second domain Gojo rather than Blue Yuji, okay? So that's kind of why I have Blue Yuji at literally the bottom of all of the limited time characters here. Now, then the next one we are going to have is the Blue Curse Technique DPS, and we are going to have Nobara here. Now, Nobara actually have loads of different replacements depending on whether you have summoned for previous limited time characters, because basically we are going to have Blue Yuta and also Sukuna, who can also all do similar type of role as Blue Nobara. And at the same time, even if you don't have any limited time characters, you can actually exchange for Phantom Medals for Blue Jogo as well. You can also, I guess, in some sense, if you can max awaken him, also it becomes a very good alternative as well. So that's kind of why for Nobara, you actually do have lots of alternatives. So if you have any of those three characters I just mentioned, you don't really have to go for Nobara. Okay. The next up, we are going to have Fuga Sukuna. The closest replacement for him in the free-to-play category is going to be Yellow Gojo. Now, I would still highlight the fact that if you do have some of the lower stages where you have the ability to bring Domain Gojo as well, obviously Domain Gojo can be played with Fuga Sukuna, whereas Domain Gojo cannot be played with Yellow Gojo. So that's kind of why there is obviously going to be an advantage of Yellow Sukuna. However, once again, as you go towards the end stages, you are actually not that likely to bring Domain Gojo to the yellow floors. And in those kind of cases, once again, I'll probably say max dupe Tin Gojo is probably going to be just as good as a zero dupe Fuga Sukuna. So there's not actually that big a gap between the DPS power here. And then for the yellow one, we have the new Max Impact Yuji versus the free-to-play alternative, which is going to be Toji. Once again, obviously, if everyone's at the same dupe level, then yeah, sure, Yuji can out-damage that. But if we're playing, comparing against a zero dupe Yuji versus a max dupe Toji, then I'm not actually too sure who's going to be the winner, especially because Toji can also do an AoE attack with his ultimate attack as well. Okay, so for all of the ones in this tier, if you already have a very highly invested max dupe, alternative free-to-play budget DPS, then there's really not that much need for you to go summon for them, and that's kind of why they are, in my opinion, a lower priority than the other characters I have mentioned already earlier. Okay, and then like I said, blue Yuji is obviously going to be at the bottom of the tier because even if you have to choose a blue physical DPS, you should be going for 0.2 second Domain Gojo instead. Okay, so those are going to be my thoughts of all of the 8 upcoming limited characters, and also who do you want to prioritize out of them. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section, and also who would you be going for.